Hi guys! When most people think about Vikings, they picture horned helmets, brutal raids, and savage warriors pillaging coastal villages across medieval Europe. But beneath this Hollywood-inspired image lies a far more complex and fascinating civilization with intricate social customs, sophisticated legal systems, and surprisingly progressive attitudes toward relationships and personal freedom. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of myth and legend to explore what intimate life was really like for the Norse people who dominated Scandinavia and beyond from roughly 793 to 1066 CE. We'll journey through every aspect of Viking relationships, from their elaborate courtship rituals and marriage ceremonies to their surprisingly liberal divorce laws and women's rights. We'll examine how their unique mythology shaped their understanding of love and fertility, explore the archaeological evidence that reveals their most private customs, and discover how their extensive travels and trading networks influenced their approach to relationships with other cultures. By the time we're done, you'll have a completely different understanding of these remarkable people who were far more than the savage raiders of popular imagination. Okay, friends, before you settle in, if you enjoy this kind of deep dive content, then click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. And yes, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and turn on the fan, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. To truly understand Viking intimate life, we must first examine the social structure that governed their daily existence. Viking society was built around the concept of the household, or hus, which served as both the basic economic unit and the foundation of social organization. These households typically included not just the nuclear family, but also extended relatives, servants, and sometimes slaves or thralls who had been captured during raids or bought through trade networks. The head of the household, usually the eldest male, held considerable authority over all members, but this power came with corresponding responsibilities for their welfare and protection. Within this structure, social mobility was surprisingly fluid compared to other medieval European societies. While there were distinct social classes, the jarls or nobles, the carls or free farmers, and the thralls or slaves, it was possible for individuals to move between these categories through military service, successful trading ventures, or marriage. This flexibility extended to relationships as well, where practical considerations often outweighed rigid social conventions. The Vikings valued competence and resourcefulness above noble birth, which meant that a successful merchant or skilled warrior could marry into higher social circles regardless of their origins. The concept of honor, or drap, permeated every aspect of Viking life, including their approach to relationships and personal conduct. Honor was not just an abstract concept, but a tangible social currency that affected everything from business dealings to marriage prospects. A person's reputation for honesty, courage, and loyalty directly influenced their ability to form advantageous relationships and secure their family's future. This emphasis on honor created a culture where public behavior was carefully regulated, but private life remained relatively free from outside interference as long as social obligations were met. The maintenance of honor required constant vigilance and careful attention to social expectations that governed every interaction between individuals. Men were expected to demonstrate their honor through acts of bravery, generous hospitality, and faithful adherence to their word, while women maintained family honor through their domestic competence, moral behavior, and skillful management of household resources. The loss of honor could have devastating consequences for an individual and their entire family, potentially leading to social ostracism, economic ruin, and the inability to arrange favorable marriages for their children. Family honor was considered a collective responsibility that required all members to uphold the reputation established by their ancestors and maintained by their living relatives. Children were taught from an early age that their actions reflected not only on themselves, but on their entire lineage, creating powerful incentives for proper behavior and social conformity. This collective responsibility also meant that families would go to great lengths to protect members who had been wronged or insulted, sometimes leading to blood feuds that could last for generations. The Viking legal system provided mechanisms for restoring honor through formal procedures that allowed individuals to seek satisfaction for wrongs committed against them or their families. These legal remedies included financial compensation, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and, in extreme cases, the right to seek physical retribution under carefully regulated circumstances. The availability of these legal alternatives to private vengeance helped maintain social stability while still preserving the importance of personal and family honor. The concept of hospitality, or gestrisni, was closely linked to honor and played a crucial role in establishing and maintaining relationships between families and communities. The ability to provide generous hospitality to guests, including travelers, traders, and potential marriage partners, demonstrated a family's wealth, status, and commitment to social obligations. Hosts were expected to provide food, shelter, entertainment, and protection to their guests, while guests had corresponding obligations to behave respectfully and reciprocate the hospitality when circumstances allowed. Gender roles in Viking society were clearly defined, but not as restrictive as in many other medieval cultures. Men were expected to be warriors, traders, and providers, responsible for defending the household and engaging in the political life of the community. They participated in the thing, or local assembly, where important decisions were made through democratic discussion and voting. Men also controlled most economic activities outside the home, including farming, trading, and crafts like metalworking and shipbuilding. However, these roles came with the expectation of frequent absence from home due to raids, trading expeditions, or military service. Women, while excluded from certain public roles, wielded considerable authority within their domestic sphere and enjoyed rights that would have been unthinkable in many other medieval societies. The lady of the house, or husfreyja, controlled the household's internal affairs, managed resources during her husband's absence, and held the keys to all storage areas as a symbol of her authority. These keys, often found in women's graves, represented real power over the family's wealth and daily operations. Viking women could own property, request divorces, and even pursue certain professions like textile production, healing, or prophecy. The symbolic importance of keys in Viking society cannot overstate it, as they represented far more than simple access to storage areas and valuables. The key-bearing woman was recognized as the economic manager of the household, responsible for rationing food supplies, managing trade goods, and making decisions about resource allocation that could determine the family's survival during harsh winters or economic hardship. This authority extended to supervising servants and slaves, organizing seasonal work activities, and maintaining relationships with neighboring households that were essential for mutual support and protection. The textile work that occupied much of Viking women's time was far more than simple domestic activity, representing a complex economic system that connected households to regional and international trade networks. Women were responsible for every aspect of cloth production, from raising sheep and growing flax to spinning thread, weaving fabric, and creating finished garments that could be traded for essential goods like iron tools, exotic spices, or precious metals. The quality of textiles produced by a household's women directly affected the family's wealth and social status, making their skills as valuable as men's abilities in warfare or trade. The seasonal cycle of textile production required careful planning and coordination that demonstrated women's organizational abilities and long-term thinking. Spring brought sheep shearing and flax planting, summer involved the processing of raw materials and the beginning of spinning activities, autumn saw intensive weaving as families prepared for winter, and winter months were devoted to creating finished garments and decorative items. This annual cycle required women to balance immediate household needs with longer-term production goals while also managing their other domestic responsibilities. The economic value of women's textile work extended beyond local markets to include luxury goods that were traded across vast distances throughout the Viking world. Fine woolen cloaks, elaborate tapestries, and intricately decorated clothing were prized commodities that could command high prices in foreign markets, making skilled textile workers valuable assets to their families and communities. Some women achieved considerable wealth and independence through their textile expertise, using their earnings to purchase land, livestock, or other investments that enhanced their economic security. The tools and techniques used in Viking textile production reveal sophisticated technological knowledge that was passed down through generations of women who continuously refined and improved their methods. Archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence of advanced spinning wheels, complex looms, and specialized tools for different aspects of cloth production that demonstrate the high level of skill required to master these crafts. The presence of imported raw materials like silk thread and exotic dyes in Viking textile sites indicates that women had access to international trade networks and the knowledge necessary to work with foreign materials. The social aspects of textile production created important networks of cooperation and mutual support among women that strengthened community bonds and provided mechanisms for sharing knowledge, resources, and assistance during difficult times. Women would gather in groups to work on large projects like ship sails or ceremonial hangings, combining their individual skills to create products that no single person could complete alone. These working sessions also provided opportunities for socializing, sharing news, and maintaining relationships that were crucial for family welfare and community cohesion. The legal status of Viking women was remarkably advanced for the medieval period. They could inherit property from their fathers in the absence of male heirs, retain ownership of their personal belongings after marriage, and even represent themselves in legal proceedings under certain circumstances. A woman's consent was legally required for marriage, and she retained the right to divorce her husband for specific reasons, including failure to provide for the family, physical abuse, or abandonment. These rights were not merely theoretical, but were actively enforced through the legal system, as evidenced by numerous surviving legal documents and sagas that record actual cases. Marriage in Viking society served multiple functions beyond romantic attachment, acting as a crucial mechanism for forming political alliances, consolidating wealth, and ensuring social stability. Families carefully negotiated marriages to strengthen their position within the community, secure trade relationships, or resolve feuds between rival groups. However, this practical approach did not preclude genuine affection between spouses, and many sagas describe loving relationships that developed within arranged marriages. The Vikings understood that successful households required compatibility and mutual respect between partners, even when the initial match was made for strategic reasons. The process of arranging a marriage began with careful consideration of the potential match's social standing, wealth, and family reputation. Parents or guardians would investigate not only the immediate family, but also extended relatives to ensure there were no hereditary diseases, criminal histories, or blood feuds that might affect their own family's safety. These negotiations could take months or even years, involving multiple meetings between families and extensive discussions about the terms of the union. The bride's family would assess the groom's ability to provide for their daughter, while the groom's family evaluated the bride's domestic skills, family connections, and the size of her dowry. The investigation process that preceded marriage negotiations was thorough and systematic, involving consultation with traders, travelers, and other families who might have knowledge about the prospective spouse's background and character. Families would send representatives to observe potential matches during public gatherings, religious festivals, or market days to assess their behavior, skills, and social interactions. This reconnaissance phase could extend across multiple seasons and involve considerable expense in travel and hospitality costs, demonstrating the importance families placed on making appropriate matches for their children. The role of professional matchmakers, or marriage brokers, emerged in larger Viking communities where families needed assistance in identifying suitable partners and negotiating complex arrangements between households of different social standings or geographic locations. These intermediaries possessed extensive knowledge of genealogies, family histories, and social connections that enabled them to identify compatible matches and facilitate negotiations between parties who might otherwise have difficulty reaching agreements. Successful matchmakers were compensated generously for their services and often developed reputations that extended across entire regions. The evaluation of potential brides involved assessment of numerous qualities beyond simple physical attractiveness, including domestic skills, moral character, family connections, and potential for bearing healthy children. Prospective mothers-in-law would observe young women during communal activities like food preparation, textile work, and religious ceremonies to gauge their competence, temperament, and ability to integrate successfully into new family situations. Evidence of industriousness, intelligence, and social grace were particularly valued, as these qualities would contribute to household prosperity and family honor. The assessment of potential grooms focused on their ability to provide economic security, protect their families from external threats, and maintain the social standing appropriate to their wives' expectations and family backgrounds. Young men were evaluated based on their skills in farming, crafts, or trade, their success in previous economic ventures, their reputation for honesty and reliability, and their potential for leadership within their communities. Military prowess and the ability to defend household interests were also important considerations, particularly in regions where conflict was common or external threats were significant. The negotiation of marriage terms involved complex discussions about property rights, inheritance arrangements, and the respective obligations of both families to the new household being established. These conversations required careful attention to legal precedents, traditional practices, and the specific circumstances of the families involved, often necessitating consultation with legal experts or community elders who possessed knowledge of appropriate procedures and customary arrangements. The resulting agreements would be formalized in contracts that specified the rights and responsibilities of all parties involved in the marriage alliance. The role of extended family members in marriage arrangements reflected the communal nature of Viking society and the understanding that marriages affected entire kinship networks rather than just the immediate participants. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins would be consulted during the negotiation process, and their approval was often necessary before agreements could be finalized. This involvement of extended family provided additional security for the new couple, while also ensuring that the marriage would strengthen rather than complicate existing family relationships and obligations. The timing of marriage negotiations was carefully coordinated with seasonal activities, religious festivals, and other family obligations to ensure that all necessary parties could participate fully in the decision-making process. Families would often plan these discussions to coincide with major gatherings where relatives could travel from distant locations to participate in person. The seasonal nature of Viking life meant that negotiations might be suspended during busy agricultural periods or dangerous travel seasons, extending the process over multiple years in some cases. Courtship rituals among the Vikings were surprisingly romantic, despite the practical nature of marriage arrangements. Young men were expected to demonstrate their worthiness through displays of skill, courage, and generosity. They might compose poetry for their intended bride, perform heroic deeds in her honor, or present elaborate gifts as tokens of their affection. The exchange of gifts played a crucial role in courtship, with both families participating in an escalating series of presents that demonstrated their wealth and commitment to the union. These gifts ranged from practical items like fine clothing and jewelry to more symbolic offerings like weapons or religious artifacts. The engagement period, known as festar, was a formal legal arrangement that carried significant obligations for both parties. During this time, the families would finalize the details of the marriage contract, including the bride price that the groom's family would pay to the bride's parents and the dowry that would accompany the bride to her new home. The engagement was considered so binding that breaking it without just cause could result in legal penalties and social ostracism. This period also allowed the couple to spend supervised time together, getting to know each other before the wedding ceremony took place. Viking wedding ceremonies were elaborate affairs that could last for several days, combining pagan religious rituals with legal procedures and community celebrations. The ceremony typically began with the bride and groom exchanging swords, symbolizing the transfer of protection from the bride's family to the groom's family. The groom would present his ancestral sword to the bride, who would then safeguard it for their future sons, while the bride would give the groom a sword representing her family's honor and expectations. This exchange emphasized the martial nature of Viking society and the importance of honor in maintaining family relationships. The religious aspects of Viking weddings involved invoking the blessings of multiple gods, particularly Frigg, the goddess of marriage and motherhood, and Frey, the god of fertility and prosperity. The couple would make offerings at local temples or sacred groves, often including valuable items like gold rings, weapons, or livestock. These offerings were believed to ensure the couple's fertility, prosperity, and protection from evil spirits or curses. The community's participation in these rituals reinforced social bonds and demonstrated collective support for the new family unit. The ceremonial sharing of mead from a special cup symbolized the couple's commitment to share their lives and resources. The legal formalities of Viking marriage were as important as the religious ceremonies, requiring witnesses from both families and formal declarations before the community assembly. The marriage contract would be read aloud, specifying the rights and obligations of both spouses, the disposition of property, and the arrangements for any children from the union. These contracts were often quite detailed, addressing potential future scenarios like the death of a spouse, divorce proceedings, or the division of property. The public nature of these declarations ensured that the marriage would be recognized by the entire community and could be defended in legal disputes. Following the formal ceremonies, the wedding celebration would continue with elaborate feasts that could last for days, depending on the family's wealth and social status. These festivities served multiple purposes beyond simple celebration, providing opportunities for families to strengthen social networks, negotiate future business arrangements, and display their prosperity to the community. The quantity and quality of food and drink served reflected the family's status and their commitment to honoring their guests. Entertainment included storytelling, poetry recitations, musical performances, and athletic competitions that reinforced community bonds and celebrated Viking cultural values. The wedding night ritual, known as brúðlaup, was surrounded by specific customs designed to ensure fertility and ward off evil influences. The bride would be escorted to the marriage bed by married women from both families, who would offer advice and blessings for a fruitful union. The bed itself would be prepared with special linens and adorned with flowers and herbs believed to promote conception and protect against malevolent spirits. The groom would join his bride after receiving similar counsel from the men of the community, emphasizing his responsibilities as a husband and provider. Viking attitudes toward intimate relationships were surprisingly open and practical compared to the more restrictive Christian views that would later dominate medieval Europe. They understood that physical compatibility was essential for a successful marriage and did not view carnal pleasure as inherently sinful or shameful. This pragmatic approach extended to discussions of reproduction, fertility, and the physical aspects of marriage, which were considered natural and necessary parts of life. Parents would provide explicit instruction to their children about marital expectations and responsibilities, ensuring they were prepared for adult relationships. The Viking understanding of human sexuality was remarkably sophisticated for its time, incorporating both practical knowledge gained through observation and experience, as well as spiritual beliefs about the sacred nature of procreative acts. They recognized that successful marriages required not only emotional compatibility and economic cooperation, but also physical harmony between spouses who would share intimate relationships throughout their lives. This holistic approach to marital relationships reflected their broader cultural values that emphasized balance, reciprocity, and mutual satisfaction in all important human interactions. The education of young people about intimate relationships began early and involved gradual introduction to concepts of attraction, courtship, and marital responsibilities through observation of adult behavior, participation in community festivals, and formal instruction from parents and other trusted adults. Boys learned about their roles as protectors and providers while also receiving guidance about treating their future wives with respect and consideration. Girls were taught about their domestic responsibilities and the importance of maintaining family honor, while also learning about their rights and the expectations they could reasonably have of their husbands. The concept of mutual pleasure in marital relationships was explicitly acknowledged in Viking culture, which understood that sustainable partnerships required satisfaction and fulfillment for both spouses rather than just the completion of reproductive and economic obligations. This recognition of women's needs and desires was unusual in medieval societies and reflected the Vikings' relatively egalitarian approach to many aspects of human relationships. The emphasis on mutual satisfaction contributed to the stability of Viking marriages and the relatively low rates of abandonment or serious marital discord reported in historical sources. The seasonal rhythms of Viking life created natural patterns in intimate relationships that couples learned to navigate and appreciate as part of their shared experience. The long winter months provided extended opportunities for couples to focus on their personal relationships and emotional bonds, while the busy summer seasons of farming, trading, and travel required different approaches to maintaining intimacy despite external demands and sometimes prolonged separations. Successful couples developed strategies for adapting their relationship patterns to these seasonal changes while maintaining their emotional and physical connection throughout the year. The privacy concerns that affected intimate relationships in Viking households were addressed through various architectural features and social conventions that created opportunities for couples to spend time alone despite the communal nature of their living arrangements. Wealthy families might construct separate sleeping quarters or private rooms for married couples, while those with more modest resources used curtains, screens, or temporary partitions to create intimate spaces within larger communal areas. Social etiquette also developed around respecting couples' privacy and providing them with opportunities for personal time without interference from other household members. The role of physical affection and emotional expression in Viking marriages went beyond simple duty or obligation to include genuine appreciation for the companionship, support, and love that characterized successful partnerships. Historical sources describe couples who clearly enjoyed each other's company and took pleasure in sharing their lives, experiences, and challenges together. This emotional dimension of Viking marriages contributed to their durability and helped explain why many couples chose to remain together even when legal and social obstacles to divorce were relatively minimal. The Vikings' practical approach to contraception and family planning reflected their understanding that successful households required careful management of resources and timing of major life events like childbirth. Various herbal remedies, mechanical devices, and behavioral techniques were employed by couples who needed to prevent pregnancy during difficult economic periods, times of conflict, or when existing children required intensive care and attention. This knowledge was typically shared among women and passed down through family networks, creating informal but effective systems for reproductive health management. The treatment of fertility problems and reproductive difficulties demonstrated the Vikings' compassionate approach to couples who struggled with conception or pregnancy loss. Both medical remedies and spiritual interventions were available to help couples overcome these challenges, including herbal treatments, dietary modifications, ritual purifications, and appeals to various deities associated with fertility and childbirth. The community generally supported couples facing these difficulties rather than viewing them as personal failures or divine punishment, reflecting cultural values that emphasized mutual assistance and collective responsibility for family welfare. The Vikings had a sophisticated understanding of human fertility and reproductive cycles passed down through generations of practical observation and folk wisdom. Women were taught to track their monthly cycles and recognize the signs of pregnancy, while men learned about the timing of conception and the importance of regular intimate relations for maintaining family bonds. This knowledge was considered essential for successful household management, as children represented both the future of the family line and additional labor for agricultural and domestic tasks. Fertility rituals and herbal remedies were common practices aimed at ensuring successful conception and healthy pregnancies. Viking medical knowledge relating to reproductive health was surprisingly advanced for the medieval period, incorporating both empirical observation and supernatural beliefs. Midwives held positions of great respect within the community, possessing extensive knowledge of herbs, potions, and procedures for managing pregnancy, childbirth, and postnatal care. They understood the importance of hygiene, proper nutrition, and emotional support for expectant mothers. Their expertise extended to treating fertility problems, managing difficult births, and caring for newborns and their mothers during the vulnerable postpartum period. The Norse approach to contraception and family planning reflected their practical attitude toward reproductive matters. While they desired children for economic and social reasons, they also understood the need to space births appropriately and limit family size when resources were scarce. Various herbal remedies and mechanical methods were employed to prevent unwanted pregnancies, though their effectiveness varied considerably. This knowledge was typically shared among women and passed down through female family lines, creating a network of reproductive wisdom that operated alongside formal medical practices. Privacy within Viking households was limited by the communal nature of their living arrangements, but couples developed various strategies for maintaining intimate relationships within these constraints. The design of Viking homes, with their central hearth and surrounding sleeping areas, meant that most activities took place in shared spaces. However, married couples typically had their own sleeping alcove or private section of the main hall where they could retreat for personal time. During warmer months, couples might seek privacy outdoors, taking advantage of the long summer days and the extensive forests and meadows surrounding their settlements. The seasonal nature of Viking life significantly influenced their approach to intimate relationships and reproductive timing. The long, dark winters provided natural opportunities for couples to spend extended time together, often resulting in a spring surge of births 9 months later. These winter months were considered ideal for deepening marital bonds, as the demands of agricultural work were minimal and families gathered closely around their hearths for warmth and companionship. Summer brought increased activity with farming, trading, and raiding expeditions that could separate couples for extended periods. Viking attitudes toward extramarital relationships were complex and varied, depending on the specific circumstances and social status of those involved. While adultery was generally condemned and could result in severe legal and social consequences, there were recognized categories of acceptable relationships outside marriage. Concubinage was a legally recognized institution that allowed wealthy men to maintain secondary relationships with women of lower social status. These arrangements provided some protection for the women and legitimized their children, though they did not carry the same social weight as formal marriage. The legal system provided specific remedies for various forms of sexual misconduct, with penalties that reflected the Vikings' practical approach to maintaining social order. Adultery by a married woman was considered a serious crime that dishonored both her husband and her family, potentially resulting in divorce, financial penalties, or even violence if the husband chose to seek immediate revenge. However, The law also provided structured alternatives to blood feuds, allowing offended parties to seek compensation through the court system rather than resorting to vigilante justice. The complexity of Viking adultery laws reflected their nuanced understanding of the different circumstances and motivations that might lead to extramarital relationships. The legal system distinguished between cases involving coercion, seduction, mutual consent, and various degrees of emotional involvement, assigning different penalties and remedies based on these distinctions. Women who were forced into unwanted relationships were generally treated as victims rather than offenders, while those who willingly participated in adultery faced more severe consequences that could include loss of property, social status, and family support. The enforcement of sexual conduct laws required careful investigation and evaluation of evidence that often involved intimate details of private relationships and personal behavior. Community members were expected to report serious violations of sexual morality, but they were also cautioned against making false accusations that could destroy reputations and disrupt social harmony. The legal process included provisions for witnesses, character testimony, and various forms of evidence that could support or refute claims of sexual misconduct, creating a relatively sophisticated system for adjudicating these sensitive matters. The concept of sexual honor extended beyond simple fidelity to include broader expectations about appropriate behavior, discretion, and respect for social boundaries that governed interactions between men and women. Both spouses were expected to conduct themselves in ways that reflected positively on their families and avoided creating opportunities for gossip, suspicion, or social conflict. This emphasis on maintaining appearances and avoiding scandal sometimes created tension between personal desires and social expectations, requiring individuals to carefully navigate the boundaries between private satisfaction and public respectability. The rehabilitation of individuals who had violated sexual conduct norms was possible through various mechanisms that allowed for redemption and reintegration into community life. These might include public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, payment of compensation to injured parties, completion of religious or community service obligations, or temporary exile followed by formal readmission to the community. The availability of these redemptive processes reflected the Vikings' practical understanding that permanent ostracism could be economically and socially disruptive for entire communities. The treatment of rape and sexual assault in Viking law demonstrated their recognition of these acts as serious crimes that violated both individual rights and community standards. The penalties for sexual violence were severe and could include substantial financial compensation, physical punishment, exile, or even death in extreme cases. The legal system also provided protections for victims that included support from family members, community assistance, and various forms of restitution designed to restore their social standing and economic security. The prosecution of sexual crimes required careful attention to evidence, witness testimony, and the credibility of all parties involved, creating legal procedures that attempted to balance justice for victims with protection against false accusations. The community played an active role in these proceedings, both in investigating alleged crimes and in supporting victims through the legal process and its aftermath. This collective involvement reflected the Vikings' understanding that sexual violence affected not only individual victims, but entire communities that shared responsibility for maintaining safety and social order. The prevention of sexual misconduct involved various educational, social, and legal measures designed to clarify behavioral expectations and discourage violations of community standards. Young people received instruction about appropriate conduct in different social situations, while adults were reminded of their obligations through religious teachings, legal pronouncements, and community discussions. The presence of respected elders and community leaders at social gatherings helped maintain appropriate behavior and provide immediate intervention when problems arose. The intersection of sexual conduct laws with other aspects of Viking legal and social systems created complex relationships between personal behavior, family honor, property rights, and community welfare. Violations of sexual morality could affect inheritance arrangements, business relationships, political alliances, and various other aspects of social and economic life that extended far beyond the immediate participants. This interconnectedness meant that sexual misconduct often had cascading effects that required careful management to prevent broader social disruption. The role of forgiveness and reconciliation in addressing sexual misconduct reflected the Vikings' practical understanding that communities needed mechanisms for healing and moving forward after serious violations of trust and social norms. While some offenses were considered so serious that they required permanent separation or exile, many cases could be resolved through negotiated settlements that address the needs of all affected parties while preserving community cohesion. These reconciliation processes often involved extended family members, community leaders, and sometimes religious authorities who helped facilitate understanding and agreement between conflicting parties. Male sexual misconduct was judged differently depending on the circumstances and the social status of those involved. A married man's relationships with unmarried women of lower status might be overlooked as long as he fulfilled his obligations to his wife and legitimate children. However, seducing another man's wife or daughter could trigger serious legal consequences and potentially violent retaliation from the offended family. The Vikings understood that sexual relationships had broader social implications and attempted to regulate them through laws that balanced individual desires with community stability. The treatment of pregnancy and childbirth reflected both the joy of new life and the very real dangers faced by mothers in medieval times. Pregnant women received special care and attention from their families and communities, with specific dietary recommendations, work restrictions, and ritual protections designed to ensure successful delivery of healthy children. The community would rally around expectant mothers, providing practical support and emotional encouragement throughout the pregnancy and delivery process. Childbirth was primarily a female domain, with experienced midwives and older women assisting the mother through labor and delivery. These attendants brought not only practical knowledge, but also spiritual support, invoking the protection of goddesses associated with childbirth and fertility. The birthing process was surrounded by rituals designed to ease labor pains, protect against complications, and ensure the health of both mother and child. Herbal remedies, protective amulets, and specific prayers or incantations were common elements of Viking birthing practices. The immediate aftermath of childbirth involved careful attention to both the physical and spiritual well-being of mother and child. New mothers were given an extended recovery period during which they were exempt from most household duties and received special foods believed to promote healing and milk production. The newborn would be examined carefully for signs of health and vitality, with various rituals performed to welcome the child into the family and community. Names were chosen with great care, often reflecting hopes for the child's future or honoring deceased ancestors. Viking women's legal rights regarding their bodies and reproductive choices were remarkably progressive for the medieval period. A woman could not be forced into marriage against her will, and she retained certain rights over her own body even after marriage. Cases of spousal abuse or excessive demands could be grounds for divorce, and women could seek protection from male relatives or the community if their husbands mistreated them. This legal framework provided important safeguards for women's physical and emotional well-being within the context of their male-dominated society. The economic aspects of Viking marriage and family life were closely intertwined with intimate relationships and reproductive success. Children represented future economic assets who would contribute to household production and support their parents in old age. The number and health of offspring directly affected a family's long-term prosperity and social standing. This economic reality influenced decisions about marriage timing, family size, and the allocation of resources for child rearing and education. Property rights played a crucial role in Viking marriage and divorce proceedings, with complex laws governing the division of assets between spouses and their children. Women could own property independently of their husbands, and had the right to manage their own economic affairs within certain limits. This financial independence provided women with some protection against abusive or neglectful husbands and gave them negotiating power within their marriages. The legal system recognized different categories of property and inheritance rights that balanced the interests of spouses, children, and extended family members. The institution of divorce in Viking society was relatively accessible compared to other medieval cultures, though it required justification and formal legal proceedings. Women could initiate divorce for several recognized causes, including their husband's failure to provide adequate support, physical abuse, abandonment, or sexual neglect. The process involved formal declarations before witnesses, division of property according to pre-established agreements, and arrangements for child custody and support. These procedures were designed to minimize conflict and ensure fair treatment for all parties involved. Child custody arrangements following divorce reflected the gendered nature of Viking society, while also considering practical factors like the children's age and the parents' ability to provide care. Young children typically remained with their mothers, who were considered essential for their early nurturing and education. Older children, particularly boys, might be transferred to their father's household where they could learn adult skills and inherit family property. These arrangements were negotiated based on individual circumstances rather than rigid legal requirements. The remarriage of divorced or widowed individuals was common and generally accepted within Viking society, reflecting their practical approach to family formation and economic necessity. Widowed women with young children were particularly likely to remarry, as they needed male protection and economic support in a dangerous world. These second marriages often involved men who had also been previously married, creating blended families that required careful negotiation of relationships between step-parents, step-children, and children from previous marriages. Viking women's status and rights were significantly more advanced than those of their contemporaries in other European societies, though they still operated within a fundamentally patriarchal system. Women could own land, conduct business, serve as priestesses in religious ceremonies, and even function as healers or vulvas, prophetesses, with considerable social influence. Some women achieved positions of significant political power, either as regents for minor children or as rulers in their own right when male heirs were unavailable. The legal system provided specific protections for women's property rights and personal safety that were unusually comprehensive for the medieval period. A woman's dowry remained her personal property throughout her marriage and would return to her control if the marriage ended through divorce or widowhood. She could not be dispossessed of her inheritance by her husband or his family, and she retained the right to make certain legal decisions independently. These protections were enforced through the court system and backed by the threat of intervention from her male relatives. Viking women's participation in religious life provided them with an important sphere of influence and authority that complemented their domestic roles. As priestesses and practitioners of sade, magic, and divination, women could wield considerable spiritual power that was recognized and respected by the entire community. These religious roles gave women access to knowledge, networks, and resources that enhanced their social status and provided alternative sources of power outside the traditional household hierarchy. The educational responsibilities of Viking women extended beyond simple domestic training to include transmission of cultural values, legal knowledge, and practical skills essential for survival in a harsh environment. Mothers were responsible for teaching their daughters household management, textile production, food preservation, and basic medical knowledge. They also passed down oral traditions, including stories, songs, and genealogies that preserved family and community history. This educational role gave women significant influence over the next generation and helped maintain cultural continuity. Women's economic activities in Viking society extended far beyond household management to include textile production, food processing, and various forms of trade and commerce. The production of cloth was particularly important, as it represented not only a valuable commodity for trade, but also a symbol of feminine skill and family prosperity. Women controlled every aspect of textile production, from raising sheep and growing flax to spinning, weaving, and creating finished garments. The quality of their work reflected directly on their family's status and their own reputation within the community. The involvement of Viking women in long-distance trade networks has only recently been recognized through archaeological evidence that reveals the extensive reach of their commercial activities. Women produced goods that were traded across vast distances, from amber jewelry and fine textiles to specialized foods and medicinal preparations. Some women may have traveled with trading expeditions, managing the domestic arrangements of merchant households or serving as cultural intermediaries in foreign markets. The archaeological record reveals fascinating details about Viking women's lives through the analysis of grave goods, household artifacts, and settlement remains. Women's graves often contain elaborate jewelry, fine textiles, household tools, and sometimes weapons, indicating their complex roles within society. The presence of keys in many women's graves symbolizes their authority over household resources and their status as mistresses of their domestic domains. Some graves contain scales and weights, suggesting women's involvement in commercial activities. The treatment of widowhood in Viking society reveals much about their attitudes toward women's rights and social status. Widows retained control over their deceased husband's property until male heirs came of age, and they could not be forced to remarry against their will. Wealthy widows often became powerful figures in their communities, controlling significant resources and influencing political decisions. Some chose to remain unmarried, using their newfound independence to pursue business ventures, religious activities, or other personal interests. The phenomenon of shield maidens, or female warriors, represents one of the most debated aspects of Viking women's roles. While the extent of women's participation in warfare remains controversial among historians, archaeological evidence and literary sources suggest that some women did take up arms in defense of their homes or even participated in raiding expeditions. These warrior women occupied a unique position in Viking society, transcending traditional gender roles while maintaining their feminine identity and social status. Viking mythology played a profound role in shaping attitudes toward love, sexuality, and relationships throughout Norse society. The pantheon of Norse gods provided models and examples that influenced how Vikings understood the proper conduct of intimate relationships and the sacred nature of marriage bonds. The stories of divine marriages, conflicts, and reconciliations served as both entertainment and moral instruction for Viking communities, reinforcing cultural values while also acknowledging the complexity of human relationships. The goddess Frigg, wife of Odin and queen of the gods, represented the ideal of married womanhood and domestic authority. Her role in mythology emphasized the importance of wives in maintaining household harmony and protecting their families from external threats. Frigg's wisdom and magical abilities served as a model for Viking women who sought to protect and provide for their loved ones through both practical skills and spiritual practices. Her marriage to Odin, despite its occasional strains, demonstrated the importance of loyalty and mutual respect between spouses. The mythological portrayal of Frigg as both a devoted wife and a powerful figure in her own right provided Viking women with a model that balanced traditional domestic roles with individual agency and spiritual authority. Her ability to influence events through prophecy and magic demonstrated that feminine power could complement rather than compete with masculine authority, creating partnership models that emphasized cooperation and mutual support. The stories of Frigg's interventions to protect her son Balder and her ongoing efforts to maintain cosmic order illustrated the active role that wives and mothers were expected to play in safeguarding their family's welfare. The relationship between Frigg and Odin in Norse mythology provided a complex example of marriage that included both harmonious cooperation and occasional conflict, reflecting the realistic understanding that even successful partnerships involve disagreements and challenges. Their ability to work together, despite their different approaches and personalities, demonstrated the importance of compromise, communication, and shared commitment to common goals. The mythological accounts of their relationship addressed themes like jealousy, trust, responsibility, and forgiveness that were relevant to actual Viking marriages and family relationships. The various epithets and attributes associated with Frigg in different mythological sources reveal the multifaceted nature of her role as a goddess of marriage and domesticity. She was known as the protector of homes, the guardian of children, the keeper of household secrets, and the wise counselor who could provide guidance during difficult times. These diverse functions reflected the complex responsibilities that Viking wives were expected to assume within their households and communities, from managing practical affairs to providing emotional and spiritual support for their families. The worship of Frigg involved specific rituals and ceremonies that were designed to invoke her blessings for marriages, pregnancies, and household prosperity. Women would make offerings of valuable items like jewelry, textiles, or food at shrines dedicated to the goddess, often accompanied by prayers requesting protection for their families or assistance with domestic challenges. These religious practices provided spiritual support for women facing the difficulties of managing households and raising children in a harsh and often dangerous environment. The festival celebrations associated with Frigg provided opportunities for women to gather together for mutual support, religious observance, and the sharing of knowledge about household management, child-rearing, and other aspects of domestic life. These gatherings strengthened the social networks that were essential for women's welfare and created formal occasions for passing down cultural traditions and practical wisdom from older to younger generations. The communal nature of these celebrations reflected the collective responsibility that Viking society placed on supporting marriages and family relationships. Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, embodied a more complex and controversial aspect of feminine sexuality that challenged conventional moral boundaries. Her numerous lovers and her willingness to use her sexuality to achieve her goals represented a kind of female power that was both admired and feared within Viking society. Freya's stories taught that female sexuality was a natural and powerful force that should be respected rather than suppressed, but they also warned of the dangers of allowing passion to override practical considerations. The god Frey, brother to Freya and ruler of fertility and prosperity, represented masculine sexuality and the male role in ensuring family continuity and agricultural abundance. His myths emphasized the connection between sexual vitality and the prosperity of both household and community, teaching that male fertility was a divine gift that carried responsibilities as well as privileges. Frey's marriage to the giant maiden Gerd demonstrated the importance of persistence in courtship and the value of forming alliances across social boundaries. The complex marriage of Njord and Skadi illustrated the challenges of relationships that crossed cultural and geographical boundaries, a common situation in Viking society due to their extensive trading and raiding activities. Their story, which ended in amicable separation due to incompatible preferences for different environments, taught that successful relationships required more than just physical attraction or political advantage. The myth validated the idea that sometimes divorce was preferable to an unhappy marriage, even between otherwise admirable individuals. Norse creation mythology emphasized the fundamental importance of sexual union in generating new life and maintaining cosmic order. The creation of the first humans, Ask and Embla, from tree trunks animated by the gods, established the pattern of complementary male and female roles that would govern human relationships. These myths taught that successful relationships required both partners to contribute their unique strengths while working together toward common goals, whether in establishing households or raising children. The concept of fate, or weird, played a significant role in Viking understanding of relationships and marriage. The Norns, three female deities who controlled destiny, were believed to weave the fate of every individual at birth, including their romantic relationships and family connections. This belief system encouraged Vikings to accept the challenges and blessings of their relationships as part of their predetermined destiny, while still taking responsibility for their actions and choices within those relationships. Seasonal festivals and religious celebrations provided regular opportunities for courtship, matchmaking, and the renewal of marital bonds throughout the Viking year. The spring festival of Disablot honored the female spirits who protected families and fertility, while the autumn celebration of Winter Nights marked the beginning of the season when couples would spend the most time together. These festivals combined religious observance with social activities that strengthened community bonds and provided structured opportunities for young people to meet potential marriage partners. The practice of seid, a form of Norse magic, associated primarily with women and the god Odin, included various rituals and spells related to love, fertility, and relationships. Practitioners of seder could allegedly influence the emotions and desires of others, predict future romantic developments, or provide magical assistance for those seeking to attract suitable partners or resolve relationship problems. While the effectiveness of these practices is obviously questionable, their widespread acceptance demonstrates the importance Vikings placed on spiritual factors in their personal relationships. Religious ceremonies marking important transitions in relationships, such as engagements, marriages, and the birth of children, provided divine sanction for human partnerships and reinforced their sacred nature within the cosmic order. These rituals typically involved offerings to appropriate deities, the recitation of traditional prayers or poems, and the participation of the broader community in blessing the new union or family addition. The public nature of these ceremonies created social pressure for couples to honor their commitments and fulfill their obligations to each other and their families. The Norse concept of the afterlife included provisions for married couples to be reunited after death, either in Valhalla for warriors or in other divine realms for those who died peaceful deaths. This belief in eternal reunion provided comfort for bereaved spouses and reinforced the idea that marriage bonds transcended physical existence. The practice of burying couples together, or including personal items from deceased spouses in graves, reflects this belief in continuing relationships beyond death. Viking attitudes toward death and mourning included specific customs for widows and widowers that balanced respect for the deceased with practical needs for the living. The mourning period was carefully regulated, with expectations for appropriate behavior, dress, and social activities during the months following a spouse's death. However, these customs also recognized that excessive grief could be harmful to the survivor and their remaining family members, encouraging eventual return to normal social participation and, when appropriate, remarriage. The influence of Viking exploration and expansion on their understanding of relationships and marriage customs was profound and far-reaching. As Norse traders and raiders encountered different cultures across Europe, Asia, and even North America, they were exposed to alternative approaches to courtship, marriage, and family life that challenged and enriched their own traditions. These cross-cultural encounters led to the adoption of new customs, the modification of existing practices, and the development of hybrid traditions that reflected their increasingly cosmopolitan outlook. The extensive Viking trade networks created opportunities for marriages and relationships that crossed ethnic, religious, and cultural boundaries, leading to some of the earliest examples of truly international families in medieval Europe. Viking merchants who established trading posts in foreign lands often married local women, creating households that blended Norse traditions with local customs. These intercultural marriages served practical purposes by providing traders with local knowledge, political connections, and linguistic skills essential for successful business operations.
The impact of Viking raids on relationship patterns was complex and multifaceted, involving not only the capture of foreign women as slaves or concubines, but also the disruption of normal courtship and marriage customs within Viking society itself.
Young men who spent years away on raiding expeditions often delayed marriage until later in life, affecting the demographic balance of their home communities. The wealth acquired through raiding could enhance a man's marriage prospects by providing him with the resources necessary to establish a household and support a family. The phenomenon of Viking settlement in foreign lands created unique challenges for maintaining traditional relationship customs while adapting to new environments and social contexts. Viking colonists in Iceland, Greenland, the British Isles, and other territories had to balance their desire to preserve Norse culture with the practical necessities of intermarrying with local populations and adapting to different economic and social systems. These adaptations led to the development of regional variations in Viking marriage and family customs. The gradual Christianization of Scandinavia during the later Viking period brought significant changes to traditional approaches to relationships and marriage. Christian concepts of monogamy, the indissolubility of marriage, and the sinfulness of divorce conflicted with established Norse practices and created tension within communities that were transitioning between religious systems. Some Vikings adapted by maintaining their traditional practices privately while conforming to Christian expectations in public, while others embraced the new faith wholeheartedly and abandoned their ancestral customs. The interaction between Viking warriors and the women they encountered during raids and military campaigns created complex relationships that ranged from violent exploitation to genuine romantic attachment. Some captive women eventually achieved positions of respect and influence within Viking households, particularly if they possessed valuable skills or gave birth to healthy children. These relationships were governed by practical considerations rather than romantic ideals, but they could develop into genuine partnerships over time. The establishment of Viking trading posts and settlements created new opportunities for women to participate in long-distance commerce and cultural exchange. Some Norse women traveled with their husbands or fathers on trading expeditions, while others remained at home to manage the economic affairs of merchant households. These women often developed expertise in evaluating foreign goods, negotiating with international customers, and managing complex financial arrangements that crossed cultural and linguistic boundaries. The Viking expansion into the Atlantic led to some of the most remarkable examples of long-distance relationships in medieval history, with families maintaining emotional and economic connections across thousands of miles of ocean. Letters, gifts, and messengers traveled between Scandinavia and Viking settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland, carrying news of births, deaths, marriages, and other family developments. These connections required extraordinary commitment and resources to maintain, demonstrating the importance Vikings placed on family relationships. The decline of the Viking Age brought changes to traditional relationship patterns as Scandinavian societies became more centralized, Christianized, and integrated with broader European political and economic systems. The opportunities for individual advancement through raiding and exploration decreased, leading to greater emphasis on agricultural production, craft specialization, and conventional trade relationships. These economic changes affected marriage patterns, family structures, and the social status of both men and women within Norse communities. Archaeological evidence provides fascinating insights into the daily life and intimate customs of Viking couples through the analysis of household artifacts, settlement patterns, and burial practices. The layout of Viking homes reveals much about privacy, family relationships, and the division of domestic space between different activities and family members. excavations have uncovered personal items like jewelry, combs, and clothing accessories that demonstrate the importance Vikings placed on personal appearance and the expression of individual identity within relationships.
The study of Viking textiles has revealed sophisticated techniques for creating beautiful and practical clothing that reflected both personal taste and social status.
The garments found in graves and archaeological deposits show evidence of careful maintenance, repair, and modification that suggests they were valued possessions passed down through families or exchanged as gifts between loved ones. The colors, patterns, and decorative elements of these textiles provide clues about fashion preferences, regional variations, and the symbolic meanings attached to different styles and designs. The technical complexity of Viking textile production required years of training and practice to master, involving intricate knowledge of fiber preparation, dyeing techniques, weaving patterns, and finishing processes that transformed raw materials into valuable finished products. The tools required for textile work were often expensive and represented significant investments for households that depended on cloth production for both domestic use and commercial trade. The quality of these tools and the skill with which they were used directly affected the value and marketability of the textiles produced. The symbolic meanings embedded in Viking textile designs reflected both aesthetic preferences and cultural values that were expressed through choices of color, pattern, and decorative motifs. Certain combinations of colors or geometric patterns might indicate the wearer's social status, family affiliation, regional origin, or religious beliefs, creating a complex visual language that could be read and interpreted by knowledgeable observers. The preservation of these symbolic traditions required conscious effort by textile workers who understood their cultural significance and took care to maintain their accuracy and appropriate usage. The international trade in luxury textiles connected Viking communities to broader economic networks that extended across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, providing access to exotic materials like silk, fine wool, and specialized dyes that were not available locally. The participation in these trade networks required not only economic resources, but also cultural knowledge about foreign preferences, quality standards, and market conditions that affected the value and desirability of different textile products. Women who possessed this commercial expertise could achieve considerable wealth and influence within their communities. The seasonal rhythms of textile production created intensive work periods that required careful coordination of family labor and community cooperation to accomplish major projects like the creation of ship sails, ceremonial hangings, or large quantities of trade goods. These collaborative efforts strengthened social bonds between households and provided opportunities for sharing knowledge, resources, and social support that enhanced community resilience. The timing of these collective work sessions was carefully planned to coincide with agricultural slack periods and favorable weather conditions. The preservation and conservation of valuable textiles required specialized knowledge about storage techniques, pest control, and maintenance procedures that could extend the useful life of expensive garments and household linens. Women developed sophisticated methods for protecting textiles from moisture, insects, and other forms of damage, while also maintaining their appearance and functionality over extended periods. The successful preservation of family textiles represented not only economic prudence, but also respect for the time, skill, and resources that had been invested in their creation. The inheritance and transmission of textile-related knowledge, tools, and finished products played important roles in maintaining family economic security and cultural continuity across generations. Mothers would begin teaching their daughters textile skills at an early age, gradually introducing more complex techniques as the girls matured and demonstrated competence in basic procedures. The passing down of specialized tools, pattern knowledge, and trade connections ensured that families could maintain their involvement in textile production and commerce over long periods. The evolution of Viking textile styles and techniques over time reflected both internal innovation and external influences that were absorbed through trade contacts, migration, and cultural exchange with other societies. Archaeological evidence shows gradual changes in weaving patterns, decorative motifs, and garment construction that suggest ongoing experimentation and adaptation to changing tastes, available materials, and technical possibilities. These evolutionary processes demonstrate the dynamic nature of Viking material culture and the creative responses of textile workers to new challenges and opportunities. The gender-specific aspects of textile production created specialized knowledge domains that were primarily controlled by women but also involved male participation in certain activities like sheep raising, flax cultivation, and the construction of textile production equipment. This division of labor reflected broader gender roles within Viking society, while also creating opportunities for cooperation and mutual dependence between men and women in household economic activities. The recognition of women's textile expertise provided them with authority and influence that extended beyond purely domestic spheres into commercial and social realms. Analysis of Viking jewelry and personal ornaments reveals their role in courtship, marriage ceremonies, and the expression of relationship status within the community. Rings, brooches, pendants, and other decorative items served not only as displays of wealth and status, but also as tokens of affection, symbols of commitment, and protective amulets believed to ensure good fortune in love and marriage. The craftsmanship and materials used in these items reflect both local traditions and international influences acquired through trade and cultural exchange. The examination of Viking household implements and domestic tools provides insights into the division of labor between spouses and the daily routines that shaped their shared life together. Cooking utensils, textile production equipment, agricultural tools, and craft implements reveal the complex economic partnership that characterized successful Viking marriages. The quality and variety of these tools demonstrate the importance placed on domestic efficiency and the pride taken in maintaining well-organized and productive households. Viking burial practices offer unique windows into their beliefs about relationships, love, and the continuation of bonds beyond death. The practice of burying couples together, sometimes with elaborate grave goods that represented their shared life and individual achievements, demonstrates the importance of marriage partnerships in Viking society. Some graves contain evidence of ritual sacrifices or the inclusion of personal items from deceased spouses, suggesting beliefs about the need to maintain relationships in the afterlife. The analysis of DNA from Viking burial sites has revealed surprising information about family relationships, migration patterns, and the genetic diversity of Viking populations. This scientific evidence confirms that Viking society included people from many different ethnic backgrounds, supporting historical accounts of intermarriage with local populations in conquered or settled territories. The genetic data also provides evidence for complex family structures that may have included adopted children, slaves integrated into family units, and other non-traditional family arrangements that challenged conventional assumptions about Viking social organization. Written sources from the Viking period, including the famous sagas, legal codes, and runic inscriptions, provide additional evidence about their approach to relationships and intimate life. These texts, while often composed centuries after the events they describe, preserve oral traditions and legal principles that governed Viking society during its height. The sagas, in particular, contain detailed accounts of courtship, marriage negotiations, family disputes, and romantic relationships that reveal both idealized expectations and realistic portrayals of actual practice. The Icelandic sagas describe numerous examples of passionate love affairs, arranged marriages that developed into genuine partnerships, and the complex negotiations required to arrange suitable matches between families of different social standings. These stories emphasize the importance of honor, loyalty, and mutual respect in successful relationships, while also acknowledging the destructive potential of jealousy, betrayal, and unfulfilled desires. The saga authors understood that relationships were central to social stability and individual happiness, devoting considerable attention to their development and resolution. Legal documents from the Viking period provide concrete evidence about marriage contracts, divorce proceedings, property disputes, and other legal matters affecting relationships and family life. These sources reveal the sophisticated legal framework that governed intimate relationships and the practical procedures used to resolve conflicts between spouses, families, and communities. The laws demonstrate a remarkable balance between protecting individual rights and maintaining social order, with specific provisions for different types of relationships and family arrangements. Runic inscriptions found throughout Scandinavia and Viking territories often commemorate marriages, celebrate the birth of children, or mourn the loss of beloved family members. These brief but poignant messages provide glimpses into the emotional lives of ordinary Vikings who may not have been important enough to feature in sagas or legal documents. The personal nature of many runic inscriptions reveals that Vikings valued their intimate relationships highly and wanted to preserve the memory of significant moments in their family lives. The comparison between Viking relationship customs and those of their medieval European contemporaries reveals both similarities and striking differences that reflected broader cultural values and social structures. While most medieval societies were patriarchal and emphasized male authority within marriages, Viking women enjoyed significantly greater legal rights and social freedom than their counterparts in other parts of Europe. This difference may have been related to the Vikings' more fluid social structure, their emphasis on individual achievement, and the practical necessities of life in a harsh northern environment. The Christian societies of medieval Europe generally promoted stricter sexual morality, emphasized the indissolubility of marriage, and restricted women's rights to own property or participate in public life. Viking society, by contrast, took a more pragmatic approach to sexuality, allowed divorce under certain circumstances, and recognized women's contributions to household and community life. These differences created tension when Vikings encountered Christian communities through trade, warfare, or settlement, leading to gradual changes in both societies over time. The feudal system that dominated much of medieval Europe created rigid social hierarchies that severely limited marriage choices and social mobility. Viking society, while not egalitarian, offered greater opportunities for individuals to improve their status through personal achievement, successful marriage, or participation in trading and raiding expeditions. This flexibility extended to relationship choices, where practical compatibility and mutual attraction could sometimes override social conventions in ways that would have been impossible in more rigid feudal societies. The treatment of children in Viking society reflected their understanding of family relationships and the importance of preparing the next generation for adult responsibilities. Children were considered valuable assets who would contribute to household production and care for their parents in old age, but they were also cherished as individuals deserving of affection, protection, and education. The balance between practical training and emotional nurturing varied depending on social status, economic circumstances, and individual family dynamics. Viking naming customs reveal the importance of family relationships and ancestral connections in their society. Children typically received names that honored deceased relatives, reflected family achievements, or expressed hopes for their future success and happiness. The practice of patronymics, where children took names based on their father's name, emphasized the importance of paternal lineage, while also acknowledging the mother's contribution through various alternative naming practices. The education of Viking children involved both formal instruction and informal learning through observation and participation in adult activities. Boys learned agricultural skills, crafts, warfare, and business practices by working alongside their fathers and other male relatives, while girls mastered domestic arts, textile production, and household management under their mother's guidance. However, this gender-based division was not absolute, and children of both sexes learned basic skills that would help them survive in a challenging environment. The coming-of-age rituals and ceremonies that marked the transition from childhood to adult status played important roles in preparing young Vikings for marriage and family responsibilities. These rites of passage typically involved demonstrations of competence in essential skills, religious ceremonies invoking divine protection and guidance, and community recognition of the young person's readiness to assume adult obligations. The successful completion of these rituals signaled that an individual was ready for marriage and capable of contributing to a household partnership. The courtship period that preceded marriage provided opportunities for young people to develop relationships while being supervised by their families and communities. This supervised interaction allowed potential spouses to assess each other's character, skills, and compatibility while maintaining appropriate boundaries and protecting family honor. The length and intensity of courtship varied depending on social status, family preferences, and practical considerations like seasonal agricultural demands or military obligations. Viking gift-giving customs played crucial roles in courtship, marriage ceremonies, and the maintenance of relationships throughout married life. The exchange of presents served multiple functions, demonstrating wealth and generosity, expressing affection and commitment, and creating reciprocal obligations that strengthened social bonds. The types of gifts considered appropriate varied depending on the stage of the relationship, the social status of the individuals involved, and the specific message the giver wanted to convey. The role of poetry and storytelling in Viking courtship reflects the high value they placed on verbal skill and artistic expression. Young men were expected to compose verses celebrating their beloved's beauty and virtues, while both sexes participated in storytelling sessions that provided opportunities for subtle flirtation and the display of wit and cultural knowledge. These artistic traditions created shared cultural experiences that bonded couples together and provided models for expressing emotions that might otherwise remain unspoken. The seasonal rhythms of Viking life significantly influenced the timing of courtship, marriage, and family activities throughout the year. Spring brought renewed energy and optimism that made it an ideal time for weddings and new beginnings, while summer's demands for agricultural work and trading expeditions often required the postponement of personal celebrations. Autumn harvest festivals provided opportunities for communities to gather and young people to meet, while winter's enforced intimacy allowed married couples to strengthen their bonds and focus on family life. The impact of Viking expansion on gender roles and relationship patterns was complex and varied, depending on the specific circumstances of different expeditions and settlements. Men who participated in long-distance raiding or trading voyages gained prestige and wealth that enhanced their marriage prospects. But their prolonged absences also placed additional responsibilities on their wives and disrupted normal family life. Women left behind had to manage households independently, make important decisions, and sometimes defend their properties against external threats. The phenomenon of Viking women accompanying their husbands or fathers on certain expeditions created new opportunities for adventure and cultural exchange, while also exposing them to additional dangers and hardships. These traveling women had to adapt traditional domestic skills to challenging environments, often serving as cultural intermediaries between their Viking companions and local populations. Their experiences broadened their perspectives and sometimes enhanced their status within their communities upon their return. The practical challenges faced by women on Viking expeditions required considerable resourcefulness, adaptability, and physical endurance that went far beyond the demands of normal domestic life. These women had to manage household needs while traveling through unfamiliar territories, often under dangerous conditions that included hostile weather, uncertain food supplies, and potential conflicts with local populations. The ability to maintain family welfare under such circumstances required exceptional organizational skills and emotional resilience that earned these women considerable respect within their communities. The cultural exchange opportunities that arose when Viking women interacted with foreign populations created valuable learning experiences that benefited not only the individual travelers but also their home communities when they returned with new knowledge, techniques, and perspectives. These women often learned foreign languages, cooking methods, craft techniques, and social customs that could be adapted for use in their Scandinavian homelands. Their role as cultural ambassadors was particularly important in establishing and maintaining peaceful trading relationships with foreign peoples. The documentation of women's participation in Viking expeditions appears in various historical sources, including sagas, archaeological evidence, and contemporary foreign accounts that describe encounters with Viking groups that included female members. While the extent and nature of this participation remains debated among historians, the available evidence suggests that some women did travel with raiding parties, trading expeditions, and colonization efforts in various capacities, ranging from supportive roles to active participation in exploration and settlement activities. The motivations that led Viking women to participate in dangerous expeditions varied considerably and might include economic opportunity, family loyalty, personal adventure, or circumstances that made staying home more dangerous than traveling. Some women may have had little choice in the matter if their families were relocating permanently or if staying behind would have left them vulnerable to enemies or economic hardship. Others may have been motivated by the prospect of acquiring wealth, gaining new experiences, or escaping unsatisfactory domestic situations. The skills and knowledge that traveling women brought to Viking expeditions were often crucial for the success of these ventures, particularly in cases involving long-term settlement or colonization efforts. Women's expertise in food preservation, textile production, medical care, and household management was essential for establishing sustainable communities in foreign territories. Their ability to interact diplomatically with local women and families often facilitated peaceful relationships that benefited entire Viking settlements. The risks and dangers faced by women on Viking expeditions were substantial and included not only the general hazards of travel and exploration, but also specific vulnerabilities related to their gender and social status. These might include sexual violence, separation from family support networks, exposure to foreign diseases, and the challenges of managing pregnancy and childbirth under difficult conditions. The women who chose to participate in these expeditions demonstrated remarkable courage and determination in the face of such dangers. The impact of expedition experiences on women's status and opportunities within Viking society was generally positive for those who survived and returned successfully to their home communities. These women often gained reputations for bravery, resourcefulness, and worldliness that enhanced their social standing and influence within their families and communities. Their experiences and knowledge made them valuable advisors for future expeditions and gave them credibility in discussions about foreign affairs and intercultural relationships. The family dynamics that developed during extended expeditions required considerable adjustment and adaptation as traditional gender roles and household arrangements had to be modified to accommodate the demands of travel and exploration. Women might find themselves taking on responsibilities normally assigned to men, while men might need to assume domestic duties that were typically considered feminine. These role adaptations could create lasting changes in family relationships and gender expectations that persisted after the expedition's conclusion. The integration of expedition experiences into family and community life required careful management to ensure that the knowledge and skills gained through travel could be effectively shared and utilized for collective benefit. Returning women often became teachers and advisors who helped prepare other community members for future expeditions or foreign contacts. Their experiences also contributed to the broader cultural knowledge that helped Viking society adapt and respond to changing international conditions and opportunities. The archaeological evidence for women's participation in Viking expeditions includes grave goods, settlement remains, and artifact distributions that suggest female presence in various Viking territories and trading posts throughout Europe and beyond. This material evidence complements and sometimes challenges the written sources, providing additional perspectives on the roles and contributions of women in Viking expansion and exploration activities. The analysis of this evidence continues to refine our understanding of gender roles and family relationships in Viking society. The legacy of women's participation in Viking expeditions can be seen in the cultural traditions, genetic heritage, and historical memories of various regions where Viking activity occurred. The descendants of Viking settlers often preserve stories and customs that reflect the contributions of both male and female ancestors to their community's founding and development. These traditions provide valuable insights into the complex social dynamics that characterized Viking expansion and the important roles that women played in these historical processes. The establishment of permanent Viking settlements in foreign territories required the development of new relationship patterns that balanced the preservation of Norse traditions with adaptation to local conditions and customs. Viking colonists had to decide which aspects of their ancestral culture were essential to maintain and which could be modified or abandoned in response to new circumstances. These decisions affected everything from marriage customs and child-rearing practices to religious observances and social hierarchies. The process of cultural adaptation in Viking settlements was gradual and often involved multiple generations of adjustment as colonists learned to navigate the complexities of maintaining their identity while integrating with local populations. The first generation of settlers typically tried to recreate familiar social structures and customs from their homeland, but subsequent generations were more willing to adopt local practices that proved useful or necessary for survival and prosperity. This evolution created unique hybrid cultures that combined Norse and indigenous elements in ways that reflected the specific circumstances and opportunities of each settlement location. The role of intermarriage in facilitating cultural integration cannot be overstated, as these relationships created personal bonds between Viking colonists and local populations that facilitated mutual understanding and cooperation. Children from these mixed marriages often served as cultural ambassadors who could communicate effectively with both communities and help resolve conflicts or misunderstandings that arose from cultural differences. The success of many Viking settlements depended heavily on the ability of these bicultural individuals to mediate between different traditions and help create new social arrangements that worked for everyone involved. The economic dimensions of cultural adaptation required Viking settlers to learn new agricultural techniques, craft methods, and trade practices that were suited to their new environments and local market conditions. This learning process often involved close collaboration with indigenous peoples who possessed essential knowledge about local resources, weather patterns, and economic opportunities. The willingness of Viking colonists to adopt foreign techniques and technologies was crucial for their survival and prosperity in unfamiliar territories. The religious aspects of cultural adaptation presented particular challenges for Viking settlers who needed to balance their traditional Norse beliefs with the spiritual practices of local populations, and sometimes the demands of Christian conversion imposed by political authorities. Some settlements developed syncretic religious practices that combined Norse and local elements, while others maintained strict separation between different belief systems, or gradually transitioned from one to another over time. These religious adaptations often reflected broader patterns of cultural change and political accommodation that affected all aspects of settler life. The preservation of Norse identity in foreign settlements involved various strategies for maintaining cultural continuity while adapting to new circumstances and influences. These might include the continued use of Norse languages and naming customs, the preservation of traditional crafts and artistic styles, the maintenance of customary legal practices, and the celebration of traditional festivals and ceremonies. The success of these preservation efforts varied considerably, depending on factors like the size of the Viking community, the degree of isolation from other Norse populations, and the level of pressure to assimilate into local cultures. The development of new social institutions in Viking settlements often required creative adaptation of traditional Norse practices to address challenges and opportunities that had not existed in their Scandinavian homeland. These innovations might include new forms of local government that incorporated both Norse and indigenous elements, modified legal systems that addressed the needs of mixed populations, or novel economic arrangements that took advantage of local resources and trade opportunities. The flexibility and pragmatism that characterized these institutional adaptations reflected core Viking values that emphasized practical solutions over rigid adherence to tradition. The documentation of cultural change in Viking settlements provides valuable insights into the processes of adaptation, integration, and identity formation that occurred when different societies came into contact and began to influence each other. Archaeological evidence, written records, and linguistic analysis all contribute to our understanding of how Viking colonists negotiated the challenges of maintaining their cultural identity while creating new forms of social organization that incorporated elements from multiple traditions. These historical examples offer important lessons about the dynamics of cultural contact and the factors that influence successful integration versus conflict and separation. The gradual integration of Viking settlements with local populations created unique hybrid cultures that combined Norse and indigenous elements in innovative ways. Intermarriage between Vikings and local peoples produced children who inherited multiple cultural traditions and often served as bridges between different communities. These mixed heritage individuals sometimes developed new approaches to relationships and family life that drew from both their ancestral backgrounds. The decline of the traditional Viking way of life during the later medieval period brought significant changes to relationship patterns and family structures throughout Scandinavia. The conversion to Christianity, the development of centralized monarchies, and increased integration with European political and economic systems all contributed to the transformation of Norse society. These changes affected everything from marriage laws and gender roles to inheritance practices and family authority structures. The legacy of Viking relationship customs can be traced in the laws, traditions, and cultural practices of modern Scandinavian societies, which continue to reflect some of the egalitarian principles and practical approaches that characterized their medieval ancestors. The relatively progressive attitudes toward gender equality, individual rights, and family relationships found in contemporary Nordic countries may have roots in the Viking period's more flexible and pragmatic approach to social organization. The influence of Viking legal traditions on modern Scandinavian law can be seen in various contemporary practices that emphasize individual rights, democratic decision-making, and practical solutions to social problems. The Viking Thing assemblies provided early models for democratic governance that influenced the development of parliamentary systems in Iceland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. The legal principles that governed Viking marriage and divorce continue to influence modern family law in these countries, which generally provide relatively liberal provisions for marriage dissolution and property division. The archaeological preservation of Viking relationship customs through museum collections, historical sites, and educational programs helps maintain public awareness of these important aspects of Scandinavian cultural heritage. These preservation efforts include not only physical artifacts, but also the reconstruction of social practices, ceremonies, and daily life activities that demonstrate how Vikings actually lived and formed relationships. The popularity of historical reenactment groups and cultural festivals reflects ongoing public interest in understanding and connecting with this ancestral heritage. The scholarly research into Viking relationship patterns continues to evolve as new discoveries, analytical techniques, and theoretical approaches provide fresh perspectives on these ancient societies. Recent advances in DNA analysis, isotope studies, and digital archaeology have revealed previously unknown details about Viking family structures, migration patterns, and intercultural relationships that challenge or refine traditional interpretations of historical sources. This ongoing research demonstrates the dynamic nature of historical scholarship and the continuing relevance of Viking studies to contemporary academic inquiry. The educational value of studying Viking relationships extends beyond simple historical curiosity to include important lessons about human adaptability, social organization, and cultural development that remain relevant to modern societies facing their own challenges and changes. The Viking experience demonstrates how societies can maintain cultural identity while adapting to new circumstances, how legal systems can balance individual rights with collective welfare, and how gender roles can evolve in response to practical necessities and changing social values. The international interest in Viking culture, including their relationship customs, reflects broader human fascination with societies that successfully balanced individual freedom with social responsibility, personal achievement with community welfare, and traditional values with innovative adaptation. The global popularity of Viking-themed entertainment, literature, and historical tourism indicates that these ancient Scandinavians continue to capture modern imagination as examples of people who lived authentic, purposeful lives in harmony with their values and environment. The comparative study of Viking relationships with other medieval societies provides valuable insights into the factors that influenced different approaches to marriage, family, and gender roles during this historical period. These comparisons help identify which aspects of Viking culture were unique to their specific circumstances and which reflected broader patterns of medieval European social development. Understanding these similarities and differences contributes to more nuanced appreciation of cultural diversity and historical change processes. The methodological challenges involved in studying Viking relationships include the limitations of available sources, the potential biases of historical accounts, and the difficulty of interpreting archaeological evidence in ways that accurately reflect ancient social practices and personal experiences. Historians and archaeologists must carefully balance different types of evidence while acknowledging the uncertainties and gaps that inevitably affect our understanding of past societies. These methodological considerations are important for maintaining scholarly integrity and avoiding oversimplified or romanticized portrayals of Viking life. The interdisciplinary nature of Viking relationship studies brings together insights from history, archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, genetics, and other fields to create comprehensive understanding that no single discipline could achieve alone. This collaborative approach demonstrates the value of interdisciplinary research in addressing complex historical questions and provides models for studying other aspects of past societies. The integration of diverse methodological approaches also helps ensure that interpretations are based on multiple lines of evidence rather than limited or potentially biased sources. The cultural significance of Viking relationship studies extends beyond academic interest to include their role in contemporary discussions about gender equality, family values, and social organization. The Viking example of relatively egalitarian gender relationships and flexible family structures provides historical precedent for modern social movements and policy debates. However, it is important to remember that Viking society operated within very different contexts and constraints than contemporary societies, and their solutions may not be directly applicable to modern situations. The preservation of Viking heritage sites, artifacts, and cultural knowledge requires ongoing commitment from governments, institutions, and communities that recognize the value of maintaining connections with ancestral traditions and historical understanding. This preservation work includes not only physical conservation, but also educational programs, research initiatives, and cultural activities that help people understand and appreciate the complexity and richness of Viking civilization. The success of these preservation efforts depends on continued public support and recognition of their importance for cultural identity and historical knowledge. The global influence of Viking expansion created lasting impacts on European development that extended far beyond their immediate territorial conquests to include cultural exchanges, technological innovations, and social adaptations that influenced medieval civilization throughout the continent. The relationship patterns that Vikings established with other peoples through trade, settlement, and intermarriage contributed to the cultural mixing and development that characterized medieval European society. Understanding these influences helps explain many aspects of European historical development and cultural diversity. The romanticization of Viking culture in popular media often obscures the complex realities of their social organization and relationship patterns, creating misconceptions that interfere with accurate historical understanding. While popular interest in Vikings can be valuable for generating broader awareness of their culture, it is important to distinguish between entertainment portrayals and scholarly interpretations based on careful analysis of historical evidence. Educational efforts that address these misconceptions help promote more accurate appreciation of Viking achievements and contributions to human civilization. The contemporary relevance of Viking relationship studies includes their potential contributions to modern discussions about sustainable community development, conflict resolution, and social organization that balances individual rights with collective responsibilities. The Viking emphasis on practical solutions, democratic decision-making, and adaptive flexibility offers insights that may be applicable to contemporary challenges. However, any attempt to apply historical lessons to modern situations must carefully consider the different contexts, values, and constraints that affect contemporary societies. Thanks for watching this video. Good night.